This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube with a daily wrestling news update, and there is a lot of news, so I'll jump right into it. Raw this week did a 0.47 rating, down from 0.49 last week. The big news announced today, and I'm not saying this as a bad thing because they're charging a fortune for tickets for Survivor Series in Vancouver coming up this weekend. It's not, from my understanding, it's not sold out yet, and they're doing. There's no further WWE events announced for Canada again until March in Toronto at the Rogers Centre, which used to be the Sky Dome for Elimination Chamber, which is quite a huge stadium for what would be considered a secondary pay-per-view. But they announced today that this March will be John Cena's final WWE appearance in Toronto, which should help get a good crowd in that Rogers Stadium, which I know they announced over 60,000 for WrestleMania 6, which I attended back for Hogan and Warrior in 1990. I haven't been to any events there since. Of course, there was the great Rock versus Hulk Hogan match there too in the early 2000s. NXT is keeping a buzz about themselves by using gimmicks like the ECW Arena show a few weeks ago with Rob Van Dam and Bubba Dudley, Francine Dawn Marie. It actually destroyed AEW head-to-head that week. Next week, they're doing a gimmick where they're bringing back Eric Bischoff and X-Pac. So that's interesting. And speaking of Eric Bischoff, I mean, he's getting a lot of buzz lately. So I mean, that's probably a good idea. His fans probably don't normally watch NXT, so they will likely tune in for that. Here's something quite funny, and I did do a video on this yesterday. Ricky Starks, I mean, there's a lot of wrestlers in AEW. Speaking of Eric Bischoff, they used to call him ATM Eric. Tony Khan puts Eric Bischoff to shame for the amount of people that he pays massive salaries to, many of who wouldn't get anywhere close to that in WWE. And then there's a lot of guys. I remember Lanny Poffo. Eric Bischoff got so much heat to keep Randy Savage happy. They kept Lanny Poffo under contract for like 3 years at $150,000 a year. Only used him once or twice in dark matches on Saturday night. There's tons of AEW wrestlers that get paid far more than that for hardly wrestling. And I actually researched it a bit today. Well, it seems like the minimum pay for AEW is $150 and WWE's main roster is $350. Apparently, the average pay, because AEW pays their talent so much, and their upper card talent, which most of them would be mid card talent in WWE, they pay them so much that the average pay for AEW is very similar to WWE. So who knows what Ricky Starks is making to sit at home and do nothing for the last 8 months, apparently. I don't know much about Ricky Starks other than he's in the news for not working much. And I know they were pushing him before, and he won the first Owen Hart tournament and so forth. And at one point he was a tag team with Big Bill, who I like as a person. We used to be friends. And we probably still would be if we saw each other again. But apparently, Ricky Starks did an interview this week around the time of a GCW appearance and said that, quote unquote, it's a mind F that he's in AEW, not being used. He said he's home and healthy and not injured. So apparently he did a show that I guess was approved by GCW or approved by AEW for GCW last weekend. But then that interview came out. Well, so there's a few reasons why since then they have canceled Ricky Starks from about 3 future GCW events. And I actually understand why both sides are mad at each other. I fully understand both sides of it. Tony Khan comes off as more of a heel, but I I'm fully in agreement with Tony Khan's side of it, but I understand why GCW is mad at Tony Khan at the same time. So let me explain my version of it. So Ricky Starks is getting paid a hell of a lot of money to sit at home. We could guess probably at least 300,000. If that truly is the average AEW pay and they like him, he's probably getting at least 300,000 a year to sit at home. The owner of GCW has said publicly GCW doesn't do contracts. So you're paid as you go. And one of the things this owner, Kurt Lauderdale, said about this is AEW's guys are called independent contractors, but Starks has just been taken off these shows. But in my opinion, I mean, if AEW is paying Starks hundreds of thousands a year, they have the right to tell him, no, he can't do this independent. Because the other thing is AEW has 3 shows in a row at the Hammerstein Ballroom next month, which to me is a little bit overkill. One show would have been really special. Doing 3 in a row, it really waters it down. But here's the thing. GCW had the same venue, which ECW made famous. And of course, TNA and Ring of Honor have run it over the years too. But GCW had it booked for a big show in January. So they have heat with AEW because they feel it's disrespectful to book 3 events there in late December. It adds competition for January. At the same time, I guess in the past, AEW even let Jon Moxley do a job to Nick Gage when Gage was with GCW and Moxley was in AEW. But at the same time, Moxley has a hell of a lot of pull in AEW. And it's funny, for the amount of no-shows Moxley's had in AEW over the past year, it's funny that he's done all these other indie shows and New Japan shows and stuff, but no show the actual company he's getting the most money for. And I'm not saying that's necessarily his fault. It could be whoever's booking AEW's fault and whoever's arranging the advertising that's responsible for putting him on big billboards outside of arenas than not having him show up. So here's the other thing. I guess Effie, who is one of GCW's wrestlers, I guess his gimmick, I've seen him get beat up by JBL most recently. Other guys have beat him up. I guess he did a podcast saying that AEW is running about $40 million in debt this year, is what I understand from Wrestling Observer. It's what I heard them talk about, and said something along the lines that Shad Khan is paying Tony Khan to have this company and stay out of his businesses to keep him away. Of course, I do think Tony Khan is still involved with the Jaguars and with that soccer team, which I think he's spreading himself way too thin, because even being in charge of one AEW show, that's a full-time job to do it well. To be in charge of the entire AEW and all the shows, all the booking, plus Ring of Honor, plus you're doing your work for Florida and whatever you're doing in the UK, that's just too much for one person to do well. That's just my opinion. But basically, I understand. Here, I'll sum it up. GCW is now competition with AEW. AEW is getting closer to the popularity of GCW. And I'm not taking anything away from GCW. They're doing great. They're doing great for whatever they have. They don't come from a billionaire father or anything. It's impressive. Tony Khan is running 3 shows in an arena where they're doing a show the next month. It's competition. The guy that GCW was going to use took a shot at AEW, even though he's under contract, getting a lot of money from them, saying it's a mind F. So I can understand why Tony Khan would be pissed and be like, well, if you're going to be rude like this, we're not going to let you wrestle for the competition. And also, he doesn't probably want to give the competition a boost of an AEW contracted guy if they're going to be running in the same arenas. And from GCW's perspective, I guess it seems like Ricky Starks may have already agreed to it, whether he probably would have had to get it approved by AEW, and now they've taken away that right. He signed the contract that gives AEW that right. So in the end, I mean, if I was Ricky Stark, I guess he's 33 now. He's still fairly young. I would just enjoy that AEW pay while you get it, because if you were just in GCW, you'd be making a lot less, and the independents overall are not good right now. There's a couple good independents like Defy and GCW, but there's a lot of the ones that were good in the past that have stopped running because there's just way too much competition these days, and wrestling at the lower levels isn't as popular these days, and pretty much a lot of the good wrestlers are signed. There's fewer and fewer unsigned good wrestlers. So bad situation. Actually, I would say overall it's a good situation for GCW, because I never even knew they were running the Hammerstein Ballroom, and it's been all over the news today and yesterday, this story. So I think by AEW pulling Ricky Starks, now everybody knows about this GCW show. I don't know how much of a difference Ricky Starks would have made in the draw, considering he was off TV for so long, but clearly he has fans. But I wish them all the best. I just find that interesting that there's kind of that battle going on. Instead of AEW battling with WWE, now it's AEW battling with an independent company. How the mighty have fallen. By the way, I guess for AEW's upcoming Continental Classic tournament, they've stated there's going to be no interference. Isn't there always supposed to be no interference? I don't quite get that. If there's never supposed to be interference, how do you say we're now having a tournament where there's going to be no interference? I don't know. The Young Bucks, who haven't done much in a while and are another group of guys getting a crap load of money from AEW, but not being used on TV every show, let alone every week, they're going to be wrestling for the New Japan titles against Great Okan and Henare, whoever they are, coming up January 5th. Get into your comments, hello, Robert. Ricky the Rock Starks. I don't know much about. I'm not a fan of smaller wrestlers, but I understand his frustrations. But at the same time, he's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. There's no guarantee WWE. Like, we already pretty much know AEW is not using him and hasn't used him for a long time. They're probably not going to use him till his contract expires at this point. I don't know how much he's going to get with WWE or what friends he has with WWE, but there's never any guarantees of long-term jobs in wrestling. So I would just enjoy my big pay while you can, and then whenever the contract ends, if it's 2025, hit it hard. But I understand his frustrations, but it's real nice to make hundreds of $1,000s a year. As someone that works very hard for his money, I would love to get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to still be able to do my own projects if they were approved. But you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you like he did, because it clearly pissed off Tony Khan that he said it was a mind F that Tony Khan wasn't using him. Obviously, that's going to get back to Tony, and he's going to be like, well, if he's throwing these insults at me, why am I letting him wrestle for a company that's technically competition to me now? Hulk Hogan, the Glass, back in the early 2000s. Cena got to do the same with millennials. I like John. I've never been like a fan. He gives really boring interviews overall, although he does give good advice in interviews as far as his shoot interviews and stuff. I admire like his success. I've never been a huge fan of him, but I think he's a superstar. I think he's a big superstar. I think he's a bigger superstar than Cody Rhodes, which I know some people might argue with me on, but way more people. If I walk down the street here in Wichita, Kansas, where I am right now, and ask 100 people on the street who is Cody Rhodes and who is John Cena, more people are going to know who John Cena is. The Ragu Overlord. Said Ricky Starks made his name off AEW. He became difficult. Now he's grifting off AEW. The only thing I'll say is there's so many stars right now in WWE. And although Triple H does push the smaller guys and even like non-in shape guys like Kevin Owens, Triple H loves, I don't know if Ricky Starks would be in the top tier of WWE unless he's really good friends with somebody, just because they have such a packed talent roster. And then also the Rock's family all have good positions. He's on the board of directors. I'm not saying they're not talented, but who even knows if he'd be used as well in WWE as he was in AEW. But at least it gives us some news to talk about. Let me know what you think. As I said, I fully understand both sides of it. I got this ASU shirt, Jason, when I was there with Dan Severin, the alumni of ASU Wrestling. I actually tried to wrestle one of the wrestlers on the wrestling team when I was there with Dan, but they can't just wrestle outside people due to injuries, even though I probably would have gotten my ass kicked being there with Dan in the wrestling room. I couldn't help but throw out the challenge. I'm off to the gym.